o'clock, so we shall start. Good evening, I'm Angela Dixon, Chair of the Community Stakeholder Forum, and I'd like to welcome all the Community Stakeholder Forum members this evening and also the wider viewing audience watching us on this webinar. This is a quick introduction for any new forum members and also for any members of the public who haven't been on one of these before. This forum is part of an innovative approach adopted by Oxford District Council to engage the whole community in conversations about shaping the future of the district through the local plan. At the heart of this approach is an open public consultation. Usually the council would publish a plan and give the public a few weeks to respond to it. But even in an effort to engage more people more easily into this process, the plan itself has been broken into smaller topics which can be more easily debated and commented upon. Every couple of weeks, this forum meets for a presentation on a particular topic. The forum is made up of people who represent different interest areas across the region, and I'll let those people introduce themselves in a minute. It cannot represent every interest area or every group of residents. In fact, the limited time we have means we cannot even cover every aspect of a topic. The forum debate that follows each presentation is designed to stimulate the public consultation. And it's important to note that the public consultation is the most important element of this process. It is really vital that all stakeholders contribute to the debate. Please use your network of contacts to share the forum presentations and to encourage participation and comment. Especially, please try to involve members of the community who may not otherwise make their voices heard. If you go to the UDC website and search the new local plan, you'll find various buttons that will allow you to submit your views on each topic as we go through this process. At the end of the consultation period, Oxford District Council will consider all of the representations received during the consultation and consider them when drafting the local plan. So to be clear, this group is independent of the council. It is not a decision-making body, and its members' views will not override those contributed by the wider community throughout the public consultation. Participants have been asked to make contributions from the perspective of their special interest area, rather than to advance any personal or professional agenda, such as in relation to their place of residence or the interests of a specific organisation. Thank you very much, everyone. I think Stephen was going to just make a comment about the last meeting and the recording of it. Is that okay, Stephen? Are you okay to do that?
Thank you. Yes, so I'd just like to make a short apology for regarding the recording of the last meeting. We have successfully recorded the presentation given by Mr. Farrer, who came along and discussed the character and heritage. But the second part of the meeting, the wider discussion, we have lost that recording due to a technical error when we were processing the files. We've put some new processes in place to make sure this doesn't happen again, but I'd just like to take this opportunity now to apologise to the members of this forum and to the wider public listening in. Sorry, it won't happen again.
Thank you very much, Stephen. Thank you for that. I would just like to ask the members of the forum to introduce themselves. So when I come to you and say your name, perhaps you give me your full name and the interest area that you represent. Could I start with Richard, please?
Yes, Richard Haynes, representing Rural Affairs. I'm the Uttlesford representative for CPRE.
Thank you very much. John?
Hi, John Goddard, the Faith representative, long-standing interest in ecumenical and interfaith matters. Representing faith communities as best I can. Thank you.
Frank?
Frank Woods, representing Heritage.
Alison?
I am Alison Wilson and I'm representing the voluntary sector.
Thank you. Colin?
I'm Colin Bradley and I'm representing development.
Stuart?
Stuart Walker, walking and cycling.
Thank you. Edward?
Edward Gilday, representing various environmental groups and clearly playing my joker tonight.
Yes. Chris?
Chris Dodge, Saffron Walden Community Energy.
Thank you. Tim?
I'm Tim Atkinson, representing Arts and Culture.
Ollie?
Hi, I'm Ollie Pendred. I'm Chief Executive of Community Energy South, and I'm working with the County Council developing a community energy pathways programme for the whole council region of Essex.
Thanks. Simon?
Simon from Norfolk, representing now Adults of District Tenants Forum.
Thank you. Anthony?
Anthony Armand-Jones. I represent on all matters relating to movement and transport.
Thank you. Carol?
Hello, I'm Carol Sansom. I'm representing retail and demo.
Thank you. Mark?
I'm Mark Davis. I'm representing health and wellbeing. Thank you.
Thank you. Samantha?
Hello, I'm Samantha Nike, and I'm representing diversity in the broadest sense, so youth, elderly, disabled, female, male, ethnic minorities, and any other groups. Thank you.
Thank you. And then you can also see on your screen Lois, Nathan and Hayley, who are all officers of the council. I think that's everybody you've got on your screen now. Good, so let's turn to this evening's meeting, and the topic this evening is climate change. And we are very grateful to Samantha Kennedy, who is going to give us a short presentation on this subject. We're then going to move to initial discussion with the panel, guided by the presentation, and the viewers on Zoom will have the opportunity to submit questions. Now, I think the chat function is disabled, but you are able to post questions on the Q&A function. And what we will do further into the meeting is we will take 2 to 4 of the most popular questions, and you can upvote the questions by clicking the thumbs up sign, and that's how you get your question to be upvoted. We won't have time for hundreds and hundreds of questions, so do please read through the questions to check that someone else hasn't asked that question, because upvoting it is more likely to get it read out. So I remind people of that a few times during the meeting. But Sam, perhaps I could hand over to you now to do your presentation. Thank you.
Thanks very much, Angela. Can people see the slides?
Not yet.
Ooh.
No.
Can you see now?
No.
No. Oh, I've done sharing.
Do you have it there, Hayley? Can you able to share it?
I've got it on the desktop, yes, but I don't think I've got all the slides that you were sent as well, Sam. So would that be okay?
I think, Nathan, you've got a copy?
Yeah, I've got a copy. Let me share that one.
I'm so sorry. I can't quite. Let me stop this. That's so odd.
Okay, that's working, Sam. So if you can see that too, we can see it.
Apologies, Sam. Mine won't have your notes on it.
That's absolutely fine. Don't worry. So I'm with apologies then, I will ask Nathan to forward as we go through. So thank you very much for inviting me here this evening. I think in some ways it's been hard to think about climate this year because we've been so overwhelmed with COVID. I mean, it has been an incredibly challenging year. But I think one of the positive things that we've learned is that global cooperation and swift government action is possible. And I think that's really heartening because while we consider how far COVID has forced us to change quickly, we need to bear in mind that the scale of the climate crisis and the impacts that this will have for people go absolutely far beyond the impacts of the pandemic or any economic crisis. Next slide, please. The World Economic Forum is very clear that climate change is our largest risk. We are not taking adequate steps to address this risk. But in missing this, we are also missing a key opportunity for economic recovery coming out of COVID. Next slide, please. The world has agreed that we definitely need to act. Oh, I'm sorry, we've gone too fast. That's not my next slide. Oh, okay. All right.
Sam, this is a sequence I've got. You must have an updated version.
Okay. All right, that's fine. We will go on. Next slide, please. The world absolutely has agreed that we need to act. I think when we tend to think of climate change, though, we think of it as something that will happen in the future, but actually it is already with us. Global average temperature is already 1 degree higher. Our sea levels have already risen. Our weather has already changed. And I think if you consider some of the news in recent months with the extraordinary fires we've seen in Australia, in California, in Argentina, increased storms in the Caribbean and the USA, we can see the implications of this around the world. But we're also experiencing this here in Essex. We are having hotter summers. We are seeing more flooding. We are having more extreme weather events in the UK. And the risks of these are continuing to increase. Next slide, please. So the world has signed up to do something about this. We are all signed up to the Paris Agreement, even the USA, I'm pleased to note, will be rejoining in January. And this aims to limit the global average temperature rise to 1.5 degrees. This is an unprecedented level of global cooperation, but this agreement doesn't mean anything if we don't take any action. I'm sure some of you will have seen last week in the press that countries such as China are coming forward with promises for further action that could take us to an average temperature rise of 2 degrees. But the reality today is that given the actions that we've put in place, we're actually heading for a 3-degree world. And that really means some profound changes to our global weather systems. Next slide, please. So here in Essex, our flood risk is increasing year on year. Over the next 30 years, the forecast is that the number of homes at risk of flooding is expected to double. And this is not just coastal flooding. Surface water flooding, which is what you'll experience here in Uttlesford, accounts for more than half of that risk. Next slide, please. In Essex, we're also experiencing water shortages. These are most extreme in the north of the county, including here in Uttlesford. And again, this will get worse year on year as our weather becomes more extreme with hotter, drier summers. Next slide, please. And the impact of this on our landscape is potentially profound. If we do not take steps to change our land use and protect our soils, we risk severe degradation of our agricultural land and long-lasting damage to our farming economy. Next slide, please. You will all know that the UK is committed to be a net zero country by 2050. So where do we need to focus to achieve that? You'll see here in this graphic, this is where our greenhouse gases are currently coming from nationally. Our energy sector used to be the worst offender, but we've been really successful in reducing greenhouse gases from electricity production, moving away from coal and increasing renewables. So now our major contributor is transport. This is true for us in Essex as well. Transport is our largest emitter and we are very car dependent. I think most people underestimate, however, how much our own homes and the rubbish we throw away also contribute. Next slide, please. You can see the relative contribution of counties across Essex. Uttlesford is a lighter colour simply because it has fewer people. But the distribution of carbon emissions, and apologies, this is an older version of this slide deck because I'm actually missing the specific pie chart for Uttlesford, but actually in Uttlesford specifically, transport accounts for almost 3/4 of greenhouse gas emissions, and the vast majority of the rest, almost 1/4, is from our buildings. Next slide, please. So despite our commitments to be a net zero country, we are not in fact on track to achieve this. You'll have seen today the Committee on Climate Change has published a roadmap for the UK that sets out how we can actually achieve this target. So we know how to do it, but the reality is we are not yet taking enough action to get there. Next slide, please. So the government hopes that we will build in Essex a lot more new homes. And the question for us is how far these homes will add to our climate challenge. Will we be required to pay again to retrofit them in the future? Or will they start to point towards a more sustainable way of life? Will we require these buildings to be more efficient and use technologies from the off? Will we insist that they have higher specifications? Of course, higher specifications cost more. New net zero homes will be more expensive than current standard new builds. Next slide, please. It's worth just dwelling for a moment on our existing housing. Most of the energy that we use in our homes is for heat, and we can see here that our homes in Essex are really inefficient. Most of them are showing energy performance certificate ratings of D or below, and this means they're really poorly insulated. They leak heat. We are living in cold homes that are expensive to keep warm and are producing much more greenhouse gas than we need to. Of course, upgrading our homes is not free. Solving this problem means we need to invest in insulation and eventually move to new heating systems, moving away from high carbon gas and oil to things like heat pumps. We need to get to a place where when we're buying or renting our homes, we need to care about the EPC rating as much as we do the kitchen and the bathroom. Next slide, please. Of course, these costs also offer new opportunities. I spoke earlier about the World Economic Forum noting the investment in climate solutions, offering the opportunity for economic recovery. Here in the UK, the sustainable construction sector is expected to grow and create 1.8 million new jobs, with 500,000 of these in the southeast. So there is a real opportunity for Essex here. Next slide, please. The latest research shows that investing in energy efficiency and renewable technology creates more jobs than any equivalent investment in oil and gas. There is a genuine case for the value of a green stimulus. Next slide, please. You may be aware that the Essex Climate Commission has been set up this year, and this has been considering what Essex as a county needs to do to move to be net zero by 2050. It is an independent cross-party panel that brings together over 30 commissioners from Essex universities, businesses, stakeholder groups and public sector organisations to think about this challenge. The Commission is considering how we need to move across 6 key themes, which are set out here, and has already made recommendations on the steps we need to take against 4 of these. So how to adapt to an already changing climate and deal with things like overheating and flooding, how to change our transport systems, our built environment, and how we need to use our energy and waste systems. Time, of course, does not allow me to take you through what are a very substantial raft of recommendations, but I will draw some of these out that are relevant when we're thinking about your local plan. Next slide, please. So the Commission recommends that all new buildings should be net zero. New schools from next year, new houses and commercial buildings by 2025. The Commission recognises that not all old buildings can get down to zero emissions. We will struggle to retrofit some of our listed and heritage buildings, which are a key part of our history and landscape. So to balance out these emissions, new builds should be carbon positive from 2030. This means that they will be net absorbers of greenhouse gases, for example, by generating renewable energy for others to use and growing trees to absorb carbon. Net zero buildings are fit for the future. They will not need to be changed to meet standards in 2050. Higher build qualities mean they are easier to heat and comfortable to live in, but they are more expensive to build. Next slide, please. The Commission is recommending urgent action is taken to retrofit existing buildings and call on public sector organisations called anchor institutions across Essex, such as the county and district councils, the NHS and the police, to all change their estates to be net zero by 2030. Of course, this will mean these organisations will need to invest in their estates to deliver this change. Next slide, please. Our transport system needs to be much less reliant on cars. We need more active travel, more cycling, more walking. This is better for our health and better for the planet, but it means more pedestrianisation, more cycle lanes and less road space for cars. We need to move to electric vehicles. Again, these are cheaper to run as electricity is way less expensive than a tank of petrol, but can be more expensive to buy. More of us need to be using public transport to get into and out of towns, but this is a change to how we move around. Next slide, please. Just before we go on, I think it's worth drawing out a couple of other sets of recommendations that are missing from this deck, but are nevertheless worth me noting. The Commission has recommended we should be building much more renewable energy into our buildings. So it calls on every roof to have a solar panel on it, and all new build houses to have solar panels installed at the point of build. Currently, they're add-ons, but the call is for them to be a standard practice. Again, this is great for cutting energy bills, but is a new upfront cost. The Commission recommends communities are much more involved to benefit from the energy revolution. So they call on all large-scale renewable developments should have an element of community ownership from 2021. But the level of the scale up in renewable energy generation will mean that we will be putting some solar on our land. This can be done sensitively to ensure land can also support wildlife, but it's a change to how our land is used, and solar farms currently are very, very rare. One other thing just to call out, the committee's also called for a real step change in the amount of green space. The best adaptation to flood risk, overheating, and all the other risks associated with an already changing climate is to build more green space. This means more green space in our towns, in our housing developments is given over to planting. Shading from trees helps reduce overheating and prevents urban heat bubbles. This means a much nicer built environment, but fewer houses per hectare, so more expensive developments. Sustainable drainage using water features, ditches and green verges means that land can absorb water effectively and reduce surface water flood risk, and also reduce water shortages. While these are cheaper to maintain in the long term, traditional pipes under the road are cheaper to build in the first place. So again, it's this trade-off of long-term versus short-term costs. I think Uttlesford is already taking steps to deal with this and has declared a climate emergency in July last year. They've developed an energy and climate working group and made a commitment to be net zero by 2030. So they're ahead on that Commission recommendation already. Next steps, please. The Council is using its own influence and working with others to drive this agenda more broadly. Next slide, please. And is taking some practical steps towards delivery. It's issued a climate change strategy guidance, it's agreed principles to protect and enhance biodiversity, and is piloting a net zero housing project. But I suppose the key question for this evening is what else needs to happen? Next slide, please. These are the questions that are in your pack, so you will have these in front of you. And this is where we can open up this evening to further discussion. Now, how far do we think developers should be using new technology and increasing build standards to make it housing more energy efficient and use water and other scarce resources more carefully? This will increase upfront costs, though these houses will have lower energy and lower water bills. How far do we support really significant increases in renewable energy in our local environment? Why is Essex so car dependent, and what do you think we need to do to change this? Our buildings do need to be future-proof and resilient to climate risk, but what are the most important changes we need to take urgently now? And that's the kind of the end of my piece. So I'm going to open it up for further discussion.
Angela, you're on mute.
Thanks very much. Sorry about that. Sam, thank you very much. That was really, really helpful presentation. I'm sure will spark a lot of discussion now. Can I, perhaps I could ask Edward to start our discussion. And actually, could I ask Nathan if you could stop sharing the screen so that we can see the whole forum? That's helpful for the discussion, I think. Ed, would you like to kick off?
Yes, thank you. Interested to hear that the transport comprises 75% of our emissions in Uttlesford. That is huge. And it is clear that building development needs to be focused on where transport infrastructures already exist, and by which I really mean clean transport infrastructures, and the cleanest clearly is the railway, which can move a lot of people around very quickly and cleanly using electricity. So we need to have transport issues built into the planning process at the very, very earliest stages. The last local plan, I remember, made a lot of use of lots of acronyms and abstract nouns in its transport planning. So it talked about RTS, which I discovered was Rapid Transport Solutions featured, without any explanation of what these were. I suspect they were buses, but if they mean, say buses, say, you know, if you mean buses, please, in any plan, say buses, but check out whether your commuters plan to use those buses to get to London or to Cambridge first. I suspect they won't. We also had direct, high quality, frequent and fast rapid transport solutions. That featured in the plan several times last time round. I have never successfully traveled from A to B on an abstract noun, no matter how many adjectives it had in front of it. So please, can we not have abstract nouns with lots of adjectives as a transport solution? I also recall that Wendon's Ambo was included in the plan as the lowest category of hamlet with no facilities. Well, it happens to have a very good station in it that gets you, on the fastest trains that exist between Cambridge and London. And therefore it seems to me that for some reason, there was something very funny going on that Wendon's Ambo was put down as a hamlet with no facilities. I think that's the source of a lot of our problems, and maybe is the reason why we have such incredibly high emissions here in Uttlesford. On to housing. So the four key things in terms of sustainability are location, orientation, design, and materials. And I think there needs to be a focus on all those four aspects. They must all contribute to radical reductions in greenhouse gas emissions. I'm very disappointed to see that we're talking about zero carbon starting in 2025 and not now, and that schools should be zero carbon by 2030. Why waste 10 years? I am so angry for people who have bought houses in the last 10 years, thinking this is a state-of-the-art house, and they're going to have to be retrofitting at great expense in years to come. And I don't know why we're still building in that delay, which means that people are going to be facing retrofitting costs and inconvenience in years to come. I think we have a problem that the word affordable, which get used, you know, affordability and sustainability are incompatible words. We use affordable in today's money, today's budget, whatever's going to be the end, this year end, when, you know, in April or whatever it is. It's a now word. Sustainable is a kind of a 10, 50 year generational word. And while we're using one time frame for the concept of affordability over a short time scale, and we're looking at the word sustainability over a long time scale, we're going to keep coming up with stupid solutions to the problem. We need to have affordability on the same time scale that we use for sustainability. And if you are buying a house, your cost time scale is 25, 30 years straight off. So that should not be a problem. And we'd also, in terms of affordability, need to include the cost of not doing it. What cost are you going to be passing on to yourself in later life, or your children or your children's children, by not doing it now? I'm also interested in using building materials that are carbon sinks. So switching to wood and stuff like that, rather than concrete, which has got a huge embedded carbon cost in it. Water, I mean, the flood risks have been mentioned, and I would, you know, we have got a huge issue with flood risk here as anywhere, but we have a particular problem of water supply, and particularly because we live in areas of chalk streams, and they are very rare habitats. And the solution is not going to be to bring in huge water supplies, piped or whatever, or through a canal system from elsewhere, because that will destroy the biodiversity of those particular habitats. So we've got a real issue on water supply. biodiversity doesn't seem to feature. Well, biodiversity ought to be featuring tonight because it didn't fit anywhere in our whole program of stakeholder review. So we really need to, because biodiversity loss is as big a threat to us as climate change. We can already notice that you don't wipe insects off your windscreen anymore in summer. That is a massive issue. We totally depend on insect life, and we totally depend on the billions of microorganisms that should be in our soils and are no longer in our soils. And there is an estimate that we have 60 harvests left in our soils before our soils will become totally barren. And somehow the plan needs to link up with the current government's new agriculture bill, with its concept of environmental land management, public money for public good. And Uttlesford should be representing the public and really working out what is the public good and making sure it gets that out of the agricultural sector. And also that we must honor the biodiversity pledge that Boris made in the United Nations last November. We really have got to push hard on biodiversity. And I'll round off just with a quick plug for community energy. We need to be generating our own energy in the community. And I know someone's going to be talking about that. Chris Dodge is going to be talking, and Ollie perhaps talking about that later on. That is huge, to bring energy production back to the consumer so the consumer can actually produce it and consume it, can sell it and use it. And we use every car battery as a resource for the whole community to store petrol, store energy. It's a huge resource we've got. We need to be intelligent about it. Sorry for going on so long. Thank you.
That's okay, Edward. I've given you that time because obviously it's your topic. So if we have any time, we'll come back to you. So I'm going to come to Anthony now, who I think probably will have a few things to say as well.
Yes, thank you, Angela. Although, of course, I know Edward, and in many ways he's covered so very much of what I have thought about myself over the last few months. So I'm not going to repeat what he has said, or merely to say that, generally speaking, I confirm that it is right. One thing about the Essex Climate Action Commission, which I don't think the speaker mentioned, maybe I was wrong, was that they've delivered an interim report. And I think that's certainly worth reading before we take this any further. This is only in the last month or so. And there was, so far as I'm concerned, a very important part of it relating to transport, and that I think will come up at the next meeting. I have mentioned in the past my concerns relating to the need of the individual to be able to do things, and particularly the fact that the way things are at the moment, and the way the towns are at the moment, it's practically impossible to be able to live satisfactorily without a motor car. I, for one, am capable of doing so because, as I've mentioned before, I live in the centre of town. But I appreciate the fact that there is going to be there's got to be a very good argument put before the population of the towns of Saffron Walden and Great Dunmow, particularly Great Dunmow, because they're building all these new houses right on the outside, to indicate that the fact that you're going to live there does not mean you're going to be capable of travelling by car in the same way as you have in the past. It's a difficulty which I'm not in a position to answer at the moment. Hopefully in time we'll come to it. Edward mentioned the railway line, and this was in fact brought up by the last speaker. And in my response, my written response to in this matter, I went through each village and hamlet on the way from Great Chesterford down to Stansted, and each one of those is close to the railway line, because it is one of the very few ways by which one can travel from one edge of the district to the other. If you look at it on a north-south basis, there are really only two roads, one of which is the same as the railway line, the other of which runs from Chesterford to Dunmow, and the main trunk roads of the A120 and the M11 really are for getting people through the district as opposed to being in it. So we have to ignore those. But just looking at what there is down the railway line, there isn't very much of an area one can consider developing. Not so much because of the fact that there isn't the space, but an awful lot of it is protected. If you look at the plans, an awful lot of it is protected and just can't be developed. So
do you think talking more about the railways will come up a bit more when we talk about transport?
Indeed. It was just that it was brought up by the speaker.
It was. I know it's clearly a really big topic which we can cover a bit more when we have a real focus on transport, but your point is well made about the railways, I'm sure. Shall I move on to Tim now?
Sorry, it always seems to take me a while to unmute. I found that very interesting, and both of the previous points that have just been made. I think, obviously, not really being an expert on any of this in any way, so I won't pretend to be. We've obviously got quite a difficult situation in Uttlesford, as people have already mentioned, because it is a rural area. People do really need to use their cars from a lot, obviously, the villages. We've got quite a lack of public transport. And I was also just wondering if in some of these figures regarding the emissions, etc., if Stansted Airport is actually included in these, or if it isn't. It was just an observation. And also on the section that you brought up, Samantha, about the energy efficiency of homes and buildings. Obviously, we do have a lot of old buildings in this area, which obviously are potentially going to be quite an expensive job to really turn into efficient buildings. Again, that's speaking from not a lot of experience on this area. What I can speak on is from Ferrycroft House in Saffron Walden, which we have here, that we find it very, very difficult to run on an energy efficient state, really, because of the size of the building and the fact it's a few hundred years old. So I think obviously there needs to be a lot of thought and planning going to those sorts of things to enable us to cut down on all these things, because obviously although we need to do it, obviously it costs a lot of money to enable that to happen. So that was my thoughts, but thank you very much for the talk. I enjoyed it.
Can I just pick up on the cost element? I absolutely recognise the cost is the cost of retrofit is a continual challenge. There are some schemes available right now, so householders can apply for a £5,000 voucher from government for retrofitting for energy efficiency, for heat pumps, for heating controls. Public sector buildings can also apply for a grant and an interest-free loan from government. So there are some, not in all cases, but there is quite a substantial amount of help available currently.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, Sam. Simon, could I come to you next?
Well, sorry, can I add to what Sam and answer Tim? Sorry, it's Ollie Pendred. Sorry, just on that affordability, I realised because I'm a guest, I couldn't put anything into the Q&A. I haven't quite worked it out yet. But I was just going to say on that, I'm working on a project for a whole village to go zero in Sussex, and what we're doing through the community energy group is that we're actually providing home energy assessments for homes, because 45% of our energy usage is heat. Yeah, so people may be on oil or in not efficient homes and things like that. But ultimately, the Green Home Grant is going to be a real benefit. So it's £5,000 that we can get, and that's now been extended, and £10,000 for people in vulnerable circumstances. But the thing is that that's still going to leave a gap in affordability. And, you know, some people could put that on their mortgages. You could, you know, do it other ways. Or my suggestion is to look at a community municipal bond and think out the box a little bit. We can start, and this happened in Scotland, so we can start making it affordable for people to retrofit their homes. So, you know, Chris Dodge may want to upgrade his home, but he hasn't got the money. But I could invest, I've got the money, I could invest in that bond, and Chris could borrow from the bond to retrofit his home. And then I'll feel good because he's my neighbour and he's getting to good low carbon and he's finding an affordable way to do it. And not at high interest, more 3 or 4%. So, you know, I think that could be a way of blending that with local authorities, with local authority lending, but it's just something that I looked into, community municipal bonds.
Thank you, Ollie. Thank you for that intervention. That's very interesting. Did you want to comment on that, Sam, or is that something that you're aware of?
It is a thing we're aware of, and we're doing some work with Ollie to support community energy development in Essex actually right now. So we're kind of seed funding some community groups to get them started. And certainly it is something that the Climate Commission very strongly recommend actually, that the level of community involvement in energy is very significantly stepped up, not least so that local communities can benefit themselves and drive an income to drive some of the, to sort of start to solve some of these affordability gap issues.
Great, thank you very much. I'm aware that everyone won't have as much to say on this subject as others, so don't worry if your comments are short on this particular subject. I'm sure when we get round to your particular interest area, you will have more to say. But Simon, do you have things you want to add?
Yeah, one of the things I was going to add is unless we increase local wages, whatever happens, people are still going to travel out the area because the wages are very poor in the district compared to the price of housing. So people are always going to have to travel out the area to get better money and manage to buy a house in the district.
Thank you for that. Thanks. Janet?
No, I'm sorry I've arrived late on this, but the only thing I wanted to add was that I think if there is local procurement and local purchasing, it acts as an economic driver, and it also means that things don't have to come long distances. So if people are doing, whether it's capital or revenue works, if there was some agreement about trying to get local companies to do it, it builds the chances of more jobs locally and just cuts down on transportation generally.
Okay, thank you, Janet. Carol?
I found it very interesting, so thank you. It's my first time on the forum. I think from a sort of retail point of view in sort of small independents, it's also about knowing the best way forward and how we get that information to us all, because we're being approached all of the time about energy and different offers, but it's very much about being able to buy out the contract or to make it from a cost point of view, and very little about actually what's good for the environment and green options. I think it would be helpful to all of the retailers perhaps to have some information and to be able to do it as a community.
Can I just come back on that? I think one of the things that I'm very concerned people are unaware of actually is there's a grant scheme for small businesses that's currently running to allow people to get grants for some of these upgrades. So I will share some information on that with the panel afterwards. But yeah,
thank you.
Thank you, Sam. Thank you, Carol. John? Oh, you're on mute, John.
Yep. Sorry, I have a way around the mute and it wasn't working. Yeah, I mean, from a faith dimension, floods affect everybody, whatever their faith. Water shortages affect everyone, whatever their faith. Perhaps a couple of things that might have particular resonance regarding faith communities. We could approach this as a very self-centered, what we need is to make sure that we do this right so we are all right. Whereas actually, I think an awful lot of what we're talking about is both for us, but also for the wider benefit. The planet needs us to be taking sensible decisions, and we are relatively wealthy, and we probably have the resources that we will find ways of coping in a way that many in this world will not. And so I think there is an imperative that comes, that's part of my faith and other faiths, that says, there's something we should be doing here. There's probably a particular issue in terms of the dominant faith communities across our area, who on the whole are blessed with old church buildings which are very energy inefficient. And whilst that's only a minor part of the whole package, there may be some ways of actually using some of those churches as beacon projects. You've probably got people in them who are quite keen on being eco-efficient, but how on earth do you do that with a medieval or Victorian building? There's probably some stuff that could be explored there within our faith communities. And then just finally, a comment that has nothing whatsoever to do with my faith brief, but much more my love of wildlife and what's going on around us. I remember driving with a friend of mine who is an arable farmer, driving past one of those solar farms out on, is it the A14 or the A11 maybe? And just seeing his heart sink because if everything that he's given his life to is being taken away when these solar arrays go up. I don't have quite that same sense, but when I hear that they can be built and managed in such a way that is in sympathy with wildlife and with biodiversity, I find myself raising an eyebrow. I perhaps need to read some new papers, see some evidence given, because they look like biodiversity catastrophes to me. And I'd love to see how that can be challenged and changed. I'm sorry, that was probably too much.
No. Can I just come back on that? So absolutely, badly done solar farms are literally that you've glazed a field. And so there are, and recognizing the challenge of the biodiversity, the need to do both. The latest thinking is that you can and actually there are examples of where you can interleave them with planting and support bee and insect populations that are the foundation of good ecology and good biodiversity in amongst a solar farm. This is new development though in this space.
Thank you. Thanks for that clarification, Sam. Thank you for your comments, John. Samantha, can I move to you?
Yes, so rivers, the CAM is in a really poor condition, and linking to the water shortage, the aquifers that it's based on, I understand they're being seriously depleted and sewage has been pumped into our river. So there's water shortages, as I think Samantha recognised, in the southeast, including where we are, and we really need to address that if we are supposed to have lots more housing, having some kind of plan that takes into account the fact that we are in a water crisis here. And the need to educate perhaps consumers as well to encourage less water consumption. Most people don't know there's a water shortage in our area or in Cambridge and surrounding areas. I also think the cost needs to be possibly considered with fairness to consumers and shared amongst businesses as well. So I wondered how that can be done. So for instance, maybe there could be some kind of environmental tax on companies, such as water companies that are polluting rivers, or housing companies that aren't considering the use, or at the moment, of environmentally carbon zero measures. So such as solar panels. So yes, we do find that they're add-ons, and that consumers don't want to pay for them because they're aware of the price. But there needs to be some fairness, so that the consumer isn't bearing just the brunt of the payment for the environment, and that we all share it, I hope. I also wondered about grey water and rainwater recycling, and whether we can consider that in our new homes going forwards. Somehow that could be incorporated. I hear that's done in other areas. And then, yes, as for just generally poverty is increasing in Britain, there's an affordability issue about caring for the environment. And the government's green policy, I don't think it subsidises solar panels, and solar panels are one of the best ways of actually creating a carbon efficiency. Heat pumps and insulation are all very well, but I looked into getting a heat pump and it wasn't suitable for our house, and it's not suitable for every house, but solar panels were suitable for our house. So apart from that, yes, I wondered about public transport as well. So I was interested that Edward was saying about railways. I do agree that railways would, increasing railway use would be great, but also public transport, so clean buses. Our school children come from outer lying villages and attend, for instance, our school, but all sorts of schools have a really big catchment area. So parents do have a rush hour in our area with the car use. And if there was a way of having a better bus service and a more frequent and cheaper bus service, because that's one issue with why parents don't often use the bus. It's very expensive, and if we could have electric buses as well and upgrade to those, that would be really useful and could change consumer behaviour. If we're relying on cars too much, then we do need to do something, and rural areas do have that problem. As you recognised, the 75% emissions level is about transport here. So maybe we can do better. And electric bicycles, I don't know how they could be incorporated as well. I've heard that they are quite viable too. So maybe considering that for some journeys, and having more of an emphasis on cycling and cycling routes being incorporated into our roads. So yes, I do agree, it's really, really important to care for the environment, and we need to do what we can to make this something that is affordable for the sake of future generations. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Samantha. Colin?
Oh, actually, I wondered if we could also have some kind of, a local business tax as well. So some kind of tax that could perhaps be, if we can't do that on a national level, is there something we can do on a local level that could help? Thank you.
Thank you, Colin.
I'm struggling a little bit to link all of the conversation so far with our remit, which is actually to feed into the local plan, because most of the ideas and suggestions and requests that are being put forward are outside of the ability of the local plan to actually be decisive. They're all legislative or economic drivers that are being looked at. I mean, I use the example somebody said earlier on, about improving the thermal insulation of shops or factories or other places. This is something Richard would know more than I do about, actually, that most commercial premises are rented. A very good proportion of housing is rented. And therefore, the owner actually doesn't have a direct relationship with the cost of maintaining the heat and services in that building. And therefore, he has, unless he can agree a very substantial change in rent, he has no interest in changing the running cost of the building. And the tenants generally don't have that interest, because commercial rents can be they can be quite low in terms of term, If somebody's going to be in a building for a long time, then they've probably done a cost-benefit analysis and may very well have purchased anyway. So an awful lot of the things that are being suggested actually can't be delivered, in the same way as we talk about let's increase the bus service and reduce the use in cars. The only thing I know around here is no bus goes where I want to go. And I think that's true of everybody. Now, if you were going to have electrically driven buses that run all over the place, all over the time, when I was a young lad, there was a bus every quarter of an hour that I could go to any part of the town at a quarter of an hour's notice. It wasn't done though, but you can't do anything like that now. If you get two buses that come back at the same time every hour, they go in different directions. But if you don't want to go in either of those directions, you're in your car. So there's an awful lot of ideas that are being put forward, which are good ideas, but I'm struggling to understand how the local plan can actually deliver the sort of outcomes that people are looking for.
Okay, did you have any comeback on that, Sam? Is there anything, is that your observation too?
I mean, I think there are some bits of this where obviously the easiest way to change building standards is to change building regulations. I mean, there is no doubt about that. And I think, it is incumbent on us to lobby government and be very clear that actually the best and easiest way to do that is for them to change building regulations. However, given the urgency of the climate crisis, I would say that we need to take every lever that we can to not repeat some of the mistakes that we've made in the past. So some of the speakers have talked very eloquently about the challenges of building houses that we're just going to have to retrofit, and that the people who are renting them, for example, are now paying higher energy costs than they need to. Other people have talked about poverty and rising levels of poverty in the UK, and as we face a kind of a post-COVID recession, that's going to become ever more pressing for many people who are stuck in houses where they can't retrofit them, but they are continuing to have to pay very high energy bills. Actually, we shouldn't be building houses like that in the first place.
Thank you. Briefly, Colin, thank you.
I just wanted to agree that the aspirations are absolutely spot on. It's the delivery where I see a problem with.
I think my impression of climate change is a lot of it is trade-offs, and I think what people are expressing here is a desire to trade off in a particular way, I guess, which is what's coming across strongly to me anyway. Mark, do you have any comments for us?
Yes, thank you, and thank you to everybody who's contributed. It's been a really interesting discussion so far. So I suppose from my point of view of the health and wellbeing agenda, I think everybody recognises the built environment has a huge impact, obviously, the health and wellbeing of the population. And I think sometimes those of us who work within the health sector often like to congratulate ourselves and look back over improvements that have been made in health in this country over the last 100+ years. And of course, those have come about through obviously clean water issues, addressing clean water, air quality, etc. And sometimes I think we almost assume that, well, job done in that regard, and the next big health gains are going to come through technology development, etc., development of new medicines and the like. Well, I think what tonight's discussion has just highlighted quite strongly is that, of course, these challenges do still remain. We've faced problems with water, definitely with air quality, all of which and many other things that contribute adversely to poor health outcomes. So this to me is absolutely critical about how do we build an environment that actually supports health and well-being. People have talked about health inequalities generally, and that equally applies to health inequalities. And one of the things that the Health and Wellbeing Board was only discussing on yesterday at its meeting was the issue of transport and rurality and rural isolation and rural inequality. So if you are disadvantaged in a rural area, you face many more challenges, particularly because of poor access to services in transport, has been mentioned several times, obviously has a huge impact. So for my mind, we really do need to think through this agenda. And, you know, I agree with all of the sort of ideas that have come forward, not being an expert in necessarily in the environmental, well, not being an expert in the environmental arena, I certainly recognise that this is something that we have a real interest in. So I would echo all the things. So, you know, good quality housing, absolutely essential to have access to good transport, public transport that actually enables people to get around the district. I think we need to have a built environment that actually also enables new technologies to be deployed. So as we think about the aging population, increasingly, we don't want the elderly always having to be cared for in care homes or nursing homes, or having to be access care indeed outside the district. The future is going to be very much that there's going to be a lot more opportunity for people to be cared for at home, which it has a huge impact in terms of the need for transport and the way we deliver services. And of course, the other big thing in terms of green spaces and environment is encouraging how do we structure that environment to encourage people to do healthy activities, whether it be cycling, walking, sport, etc. So all of those things I think are interwoven into this agenda. I suppose the second aspect of all of this, listening to the debate tonight, relates to actually the footprint of the health services that we all use. So we can actually start with quite a positive message, I think, regard. The first is, although not directly within the boundaries, well, it's not within the boundaries of Uttlesford, Princess Alexandra Hospital in Harlow, of course, is going to be rebuilt. There are plans for a brand new hospital in Harlow. And whilst many of our residents in Uttlesford access services in Cambridge or indeed in Chelmsford, there is a significant proportion of our population, particularly in the south of the district, who will access that new hospital. And there's a fantastic opportunity to replace what is a very inefficient, environmentally inefficient facility at the moment, to build a state-of-the-art, low carbon footprint hospital that will help serve our district. But closer to home, I guess, we just need to recognise there are also challenges. So we've got GP practices at the moment operating out of relatively good premises when compared to other parts of the NHS, but nevertheless, they will face the same legacy problems that we've been talking about in terms of other parts of the economy. And I would just again recognise that there is an inevitable shift in the way healthcare services are being delivered, where increasingly our dependence on large physical buildings, the size of hospitals, for example, more and more is going to be delivered in community settings, in people's homes, with the aid of and support of digital technology. And we should encourage and build that into the infrastructure that we plan to build as part of the plan. So I think that those would be my comments. The one other thing is, you know, we see evidence of even the community hospital in Saffron Walden. If you looked at the physical footprint of that hospital, the quality of the build, etc. Again, from an environmental and sustainability issue, there are issues within the health services about how they fulfil their responsibilities to support us generally.
Thank you, Mark. Thanks very much. Chris, can we move on to you? I should actually just say quickly while Chris is unmuting, there's a lot of discussion about transport, but of course the next theme we're coming onto in the new year is transport. So that has its own separate agenda. So if you just want to touch on that lightly in the rest of the comments, because we will come back to that for a full session in the new year. Thank you, Chris.
Thank you. Yeah, thanks everybody. It's been a very interesting discussion. But like Colin, I was wondering what quite a bit of it had to do with the local plan and how much, I suppose, power that Uttlesford District Council have in the local plan to adjust things to kind of help fulfil some of the ambitions and ideas we've got. But I guess the local plan doesn't stand in isolation. So the more we, as a whole community, push for low energy, zero carbon, and our green agenda, hopefully the more the local plan can leverage that and push for it. Just one or two more specific comments there. I suppose with community energy, our aim really is to make sure that the community has a lot of ownership of energy generation, energy use. It understands much more about where the energy goes, where it can be saved. And that does require help from the council and the community as a whole. So if and where that can be brought into the local plan, that would be great. Another aspect is we do face a lot of challenges. As has been said, we are a rural community. We have lots of old buildings. However, generally, these kind of challenges are great test beds for innovation. There is an awful lot of innovation. There's a lot of new materials, new technology, new ways of doing things. So if we can encourage a background of supporting innovation as well in these areas, I think we could move a very long way, not only in meeting climate targets, but perhaps being a beacon for other areas of the country who are, say, facing similar problems. So despite higher upfront costs, for example, in housing or trying to retrofit old buildings, if we invest in that, the prices will come down. And it's also a way of developing local skills and encouraging business in that respect. I've done quite a lot of retrofitting of my house here, and it's difficult to find the kind of skills and know-how necessary to do that. And I think that's a great opportunity for us in this area as well. I think those are my points, yes.
Thank you, Chris. That's very interesting. Stuart?
Thank you, Angela. Yes, there's not a lot I could contribute to this particular debate on climate change. My interest being walking and cycling is a very small proportion of the transport aspect of things. And obviously we will come around to talking about that a bit more next time. Yeah. Because we are obviously trying to reduce the amount of public transport using internal combustion engines particularly, and increase people's use of cycles and walking. And as I say, we'll discuss that much more next time round. Thank you.
Thank you, Stuart. Frank?
Yes, very interesting presentation and also the comments so far. I've got a few points to throw in, please. In general, I would say that the public probably need more encouragement to engage in the various activities and expenditure that's required to impact climate change. Really in the same way that people have been avidly following the coronavirus case charts every day to see trends going, hopefully leveling or down. Can't we have something similar to that that's very publicly available, published by UDC, that shows gradually how hopefully the county, for instance, or just the district is improving, or how fast it's getting bad, should we say. That could be useful. On one of your other comments about retrofitting old buildings and also building new houses to what standard, and the affordability issue, I don't see that you can risk leaving the good features out of affordable housing, because that way you effectively create an underclass of affordable housing that in future could be considered unsaleable. It just doesn't have the right features in it. or which eventually, of course, the energy forms that it relies on, it can't employ them because they're no longer available. You should be starting to you should be fitting the right systems to houses that we build today, not in 10 years' time, as someone pointed out. But you can't ignore the affordable houses either. They all need to have these features. Something that might be worth considering around the CO2 produced by the construction business, construction industry, is there some kind of kite mark, in effect, that construction companies that do follow appropriate practices, use the right materials, etc., that would be able to demonstrate their quality and the way they're contributing, or should I say, not contributing to climate change. Something that Chris Dodge said earlier was about innovation and being able to demonstrate it. That's something else that we could do in this area. I'm still mostly convinced that a new self-contained community somewhere is probably the most sensible way to go with our local plan, because it enables infrastructure to get in first, and it's the right infrastructure before all the houses get put down on top of it. But why not have effectively an innovation demonstration community? I'm thinking back because I'm old. People might remember Milton Keynes 40 years ago. All their special energy efficient buildings. I don't know if they're any good nowadays, but that was one of the things that was very important about that town, was putting in energy efficient buildings. So it's a demonstration site. People still remember it. A general thought about transport, which I know we're going to come to, but it's this thing about making some kind of holistic assessment of all the costs around, for instance, electric vehicles. They're quite expensive to make. You've got to get the electricity somewhere. Doesn't come, well, sort of doesn't come out of thin air. You have to make that electricity. You have to use a lot of fancy materials. One of the things there, of course, with a lot of generators and motors nowadays, they're using fancy rare earth minerals. These come from very limited parts of the world. They're being used more and more. There's a limit. There's a finite limit of those materials. So you need to add all these things in to make the total cost of converting from internal combustion at the moment to using electricity in future. I think I would also perhaps say, wouldn't it be nice if we could reduce unnecessary air travel? It's ridiculously cheap at the moment. It doesn't help anyone, we know that, yet we keep doing it. Thank you, Edward.
Thanks very much, Frank. So I'm sure there'll be lots more discussion about air travel on our transport theme as well, but thank you for those comments. Richard, I come to you next.
Yes, well, as a former surveyor, I suppose I should be talking about buildings, but I think quite a lot has been said already about buildings. I mean, the only thing I would add is that I think the point's probably been covered already. I mean, there have been so many attempts over the last 10 or 15 years to try to improve energy efficiency in new houses, but the resistance has constantly been from the house building sector. The developers do not want the added costs, and the government has listened to them. I think the only way that you're going to improve energy efficiency in new houses is, as has been suggested, through building regulations and an insistence on a higher level. I mean, there's been such a movement to get it beyond code level 3, but I mean, it's just never happened. So I think probably I mean, it's not a local plan issue, it's a central government issue, but I think that standards have to be improved and pressure has to be put back on the house builders. But what I really wanted to talk about is really just sort of from my my rural affairs hat, just talking about how there is this conflict between renewable energy and the countryside. I actually wrote this down because I think it's such a valuable quote. It's from a ministerial statement when solar energy started to become rather more efficient. And it said, protecting the global environment is not an excuse to trash the local environment. And I think that that is something which we are getting to the stage, even in Uttlesford now, we are trashing the environment that we've got through vast solar farms. Everyone, I think, probably would support the idea of solar panels on buildings, and not enough is done. I think planning applications for large industrial complexes have got to enforce the use of solar panels on the roofs. But to cover, we've just got one in Thaxted, 150 acres, added to another 50-acre farm. 200 acres of landscape in Thaxted has now been destroyed through a solar farm. These things are not environmentally friendly. There are issues, as John has already pointed out, with regard to biodiversity. There are issues for wildlife. And the fundamental problem is you're taking away very productive agricultural land. So I think that something has to be done for renewable energies by all means, but just in the right place. And I think that at the moment, there is a rather blinkered view in Uttlesford that green is good, and the collateral damage is just has to be absorbed. And I think that is wrong. So there's just a thought from me with my rural affairs hat on.
Sam, could I just get Alison's comment, because she's the last one, and then perhaps you could just sum up from all the comments you've just had. Alison?
God, I had to give a comment for a minute there. Do you know, I don't have a lot to say, just two quick things. One is, as Tim said, we own, for example, an old police station. It's a really old building. I think something John said resonated for me as well. And you've got a bit of a captive audience with the voluntary sector. We're generally organisations that really want to buy into, be part of this work. Our problem is that we're not very cash rich, and it's really hard to do. But if you could engage with our sector better, I mean, I manage an old police station. There's a whole load of roof on there. Someone can be using it. That's absolutely fine, but I can't afford to do it. So those kind of things, we could be working on together. So I think on behalf of the sector, let's get involved. The other thing I wanted to just say, which does touch on transport, and it does touch on what Mark said as well, but it's just an observation I've had so far. Now, this is our third session, isn't it? And every time transport is a solution to the things we're talking about, it seems to me that if we have to work out at the end of this process what are the most important things, transport is really crucial to climate change. It's really crucial to people's health and well-being. If we can hit the transport, then if we can have clean, affordable transport that goes everywhere, then all the people that we're working with who are isolated, who haven't got cars, would be able to get places and be less isolated. So it would hit the health and well-being agenda. So I'm just observing the fact that yes, transport's going to be talked about, but I think we shouldn't forget, by doing it by topic, that actually there are some themes that are really, really strong through a number of the topics, and that we should try and pull that through as a theme. That's all I have to say.
There's a lot of connected themes, you're right, Alison, and it's actually quite hard to separate them off. In fact, all roads do seem to lead to transport. Whilst Sam is just summing up and coming back to us about some of those points, do have a look at the Q&A if you're watching online, and upvote any questions you particularly like us to address. Sam, would you like to come back about a few things?
Thanks very much. A hugely interesting and actually very heartening comment. So as well as a separate session on transport, I understand you also have a separate session on biodiversity. Some shakes of heads.
Not a separate one, I don't think. No, we agreed to address it as part of some other themes.
Okay, my apologies. So I was just going to say that actually the comments around how important this agenda is to, and linked very strongly with absolutely biodiversity and air quality and health and well-being. All of these things are intrinsically linked, and solving, we need to find solutions that address all of these together. And actually you can quite quickly drill down to, as Mark alluded to, high quality housing, sensible transport, and much more green infrastructure that hits all of those buttons together. So I would encourage as other speakers have said, that kind of looking through. I suppose just to come back on some specific points, I think everyone supports higher standards in buildings is what I've heard here today, and everyone has frustration with transport is again a thing I've heard this evening. With regards to old buildings and some of the frustrations around cash poor organisations, I think this is an area where locally there's an opportunity for quite a lot of innovation to think about how we pair up potential investment to allow people to put solar panels on their roofs and share those benefits. And that is that kind of community approach where we can absolutely make those links and drive that kind of investment. I think there's real scope to do more in that space. I'd like to just come back specifically to Richard's concerns around the solar farms. I mean, I am dismayed, I suppose, that the solar farms that have been putting in are such aren't managing that balance. And I think I would just draw attention that the climate change is a really kind of existential threat to our landscape. So we are looking at really significant soil degradation, loss of soil, loss of habitat, and loss of our ability to farm this land. And so we need to drive a mix of solutions that look at changing how we use our land so that we are investing in more sustainable farming practices, agroforestry, bioenergy crops, as well as some solar, and it has to be a mix. And I think that that getting that balance right is a really important but difficult problem that we will need to collectively solve. So
thank you very much, Sam. That's great. Thank you, and thank you for your really interesting presentation that stimulated a lot of discussion. Just one very quick comment from me, because a few people have mentioned today that they weren't sure how some of the comments would feed into the local plan. And obviously some people have much clearer idea about how the local plan works and what local council and government can and can't influence. But actually officers have encouraged us to discuss all things in this forum and let them worry about what they can do about it. So just to assure everybody that their comments are all taken on board by officers. Okay, so what happens next at point 3 on our agenda? So the consultation document that was the last slide of Sam's presentation will be published on the website for open public consultation. I believe it's already there. Comments received by the 20th of January will be summarised by officers and discussed at the forum's meeting on the 10th of February. Comments received after this date will still be taken into account by officers. But if you want to feed into our forum discussion back on this subject on the 10th of February, please get your comments to the council by the 20th of January. Okay, so now we move on to questions from viewers, and I think, Nathan, you're going to pull some of these out for us.
Thanks, Angela. Yeah, a lot of very interesting questions. We've got quite a few themes in there, and it sort of highlights the overlap with other themes, so transport in particular and biodiversity. So the themes that I was sort of getting was education, access to education, electric vehicle charging, solar, tree planting, and also some queries about Stansted. So I'll just pick up on the Stansted issue. I think Sam's data was 28% of emissions from transport, and Sam will correct me if I'm wrong, that's domestic transport. Is that right, Sam?
So nationally, yes. If you look at the national government data, transport is 28% as a sector nationally. I would say that that does not include international flights. That data does not include national air travel, international air travel rather. It does include domestic flights, but not international.
Yeah, and okay, thanks. And then Adrian asked whether the presentation will be on the website. Yes, it will. The local plan page of the website, and a few people were quite keen to make some comments and couldn't. And I think that their opportunity is to go on the website, and we really do want your feedback. So I'm going to take the questions in order, and the top question is about transport, unfortunately. So that is another theme, but I think we can probably, I'll just, Angela, if it's okay, I'll just cover it briefly. So the local plan evidence base will use some software sorry, I better read the question first. Current planning standards fail miserably to recognise the need to react to climate change. Housing estates are still being proposed which have no sustainability, resulting in, for example, children living in new houses being transported to schools in other parts of the district because the local school is full. Standards need changing as a matter of urgency, and that's from Colin Day. So the local plan evidence base, and this will be hopefully be out for consultation by the time we get to the transport theme. It will have a modelling of isochrones, basically walking distances, cycling distances, public transport distances, and travel times to a range of destinations, including primary, secondary, further education, supermarkets, and local centres and things like that. So we will have a very good evidence base. But on the school issue in particular, I think Essex are going to be issuing some new guidance. So the way the problem evolves is that the estate starts to get built. So 5,000 units might have 3 primary schools. They build one. There are an inadequate amount of children, so they take children from out of catchment, and then those children, siblings, qualify for a place, which means when the estate grows, there's no room for the children in the estate. And what education team are exploring is whether or not when they build the school, they can use part of it for other interim community uses, like a temporary community shop or temporary community buildings. And that way, they're not offering the full capacity and not getting the out of catchment children in. So I hope that answers it. It is a transport one, but I thought I'd pick it up anyway. The next one, Sam, I don't know if you know the answer to this, but it's around listed buildings. So it's a big problem in Uttlesford, because you have a high proportion of listed buildings, but even bigger in places like Bath or Cheltenham. So it's Charles Arthur's question. If emissions from houses are a problem, why not encourage installation of double glazing or secondary glaze in all houses, including listed buildings? Abandon planning restrictions which prevent them from retrofitting. The planning restrictions are getting in the way of slowing climate change. Any idea, Sam?
Yeah, so this is a significant problem in the UK. There are a significant percentage of listed and restricted buildings where retrofitting is more difficult, but that's not to say there's nothing you can do. So I, many years ago, did a project in Westminster City Council on a listed building, and we were allowed to put secondary glazing in the back of the building, but not in the front. And so we maintained the visual amenity, and we did other measures. And we were also allowed to install on flat roofs solar panels so that they couldn't be seen. And the same is done. I was involved in a project that put solar panels on things like the Natural History Museum, again in a way that they can't be seen. The technology is evolving all the time, so you can now get roof tiles or indeed just glass that acts as solar PV. So these solutions to allow some changes to these buildings without affecting the visual amenity are coming. English Heritage are doing a lot of work actually, and have run some pilot projects on buildings, older buildings, and how they can be retrofitted sensitively. So I think there is increasing bank of information and good practice out there. It isn't straightforward, and of the nature of these buildings they tend to be different from each other. So there isn't a one size fits all, but I can say that more and more work is being done here, and more technologies are available. This is a problem that we will solve.
Okay, thanks. Excuse me, the next one with the next highest upvotes was about solar panels. So put the solar panels on, sorry, it's from Trilby Roberts, put the solar panels on all religious, education, health buildings, etc., would reduce the need to consume land and can be used for sustainable agriculture or rewilding to benefit biodiversity. So I suppose it's an obvious thing to do, but do we have any idea data-wise, Sam, on what proportion of buildings, commercial buildings, and what sort of level of solar coverage we'd get?
So it's one of the things that we're actually working out at the moment. So the Commission have recommended that every roof in Essex have a solar panel. So, you know, that is one of the core recommendations, and that we make the absolute best use of our roof space as possible. The reason for that is that Essex is almost uniquely well placed. We're one of the sunniest places in the UK, and solar panels perform really well here. So in terms of how far we've got and what that would yield for us, we're doing the calculations now. I don't have that information currently, but it is coming.
Right. The next question is just it's a transport related, and it's a statement about the why is Uttlesford so reliant on cars. So I'll skip over that one. And the next one, Charles Arthur is asking about if transport is the largest source of emissions, why not encourage use of electric vehicles by funding installation of electric charging points at all car parks in Uttlesford? So I know Essex County Council, Sam, has run initiatives before for on-street charging, but can you tell us what the current position is on on-street rollout?
The government have grants to support rollout of electric car charging infrastructure, and the transport team in Essex County Council are working with partners to think about an electric vehicle infrastructure strategy. I mean, it's certainly something I would absolutely advocate. I mean, I think we just need to get with the programme. We are not going to be able to buy new petrol or diesel vehicles from 2030. So we need this infrastructure. We need it urgently.
So Angela, I think I did 4 questions, but I answered 1. So technically that's only 3. So do you want to take back over chairing now?
I'm on mute. Yes, thank you very much, Nathan. That's excellent. Thank you very much for that. I just want to correct an error that I made earlier. In fact, there is a separate discussion about biodiversity. So I think I got confused about the fact there isn't a separate representative representing biodiversity, but there is a discussion about it. So we can have more discussion about that when that theme comes up. But thank you very much, everybody. That was a really interesting evening. If you've posted comments or questions on the Q&A and they haven't come up, please do go to the website and make sure you log all those comments under the local plan page. They will all be taken into account by officers. So the upcoming theme, as we've mentioned, is transport, and that will be on the 13th of January. And there is a speaker lined up for that yet, and there will be a couple of people, experts invited along to help the discussion along. And I look forward to seeing you all at that meeting. Is there any other business before we adjourn for the evening, and in fact for the year?
Angela, we did have a poll for the public on climate change. I don't know if Hayley's got it ready. It was a poll along the themes in the consultation document, so it sort of broadly mirrors what the questions in the consultation document.
Right, yes, let's do that, because the polls are very interesting.
So what are your top 3 priorities for tackling climate change? It's a multiple choice.
Quite sure how we do this poll.
Yeah, Hayley, do you know how to actually pick your choice?
It's working now. Okay, so you are able to interpret that, Nathan?
My maths is not my strong suit, but I think I can manage. So 80% challenging developers to reduce energy consumption in new buildings is the front runner, followed by generating renewable and low carbon energy. And then neck and neck, ensuring the next generation of buildings can adapt to climate change, providing sustainable transport through walking, cycling and public transport, and promoting electric vehicles, charging points to decarbonise transport, which I thought was strange because it is one of the biggest emitters. And I think it's certainly in terms of developers, we definitely have to get them to install charging points. And then bringing up the rear, requiring developers to use water, minerals and materials and other resources efficiently.
Great, thank you. Brilliant, thank you. The polls are really interesting actually, because a lot of these things are a question of choice and trade-off. So thank you very much everybody for a really interesting discussion this evening. I hope you all have a restful holiday, and I look forward to seeing you all in January. Thank you very much. And thank you, Samantha. Thank you.